Story number 1. I remember the cold November night in 2001 as if it had only been yesterday, the unsettling calm before the maelstrom of horror that would unfold. I was a fresh-faced journalist then, chasing stories that quivered on the edge of reality and fiction in the suburbs of a sleepy American town. The tale I stumbled upon, one that claws at the edges of my dreams even now, began with the whispers of Carriage 13 on the Midnight Express. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, a spectral train carriage that hitched itself to the 12:01 a.m. service from our little station. I was skeptical, as was my nature, but the thread of intrigue pulled me toward what would become the most harrowing investigation of my life. Carriage 13 was an anachronism, its design reminiscent of an older time, and it sat on the tracks with an air of silent foreboding. Those who dared to board were not the usual commuters, but a motley crew of thrill-seekers, all under the shadow of 30, drawn by the lure of the legend. There was Jenna, a bright-eyed history major, Marcus, a stoic young soldier, Ellie, a nurse whose laughter could light up any room, and then there was me, the observer, the recorder of their fates. The train's whistle cut through the night like a premonition as we boarded. The interior was an eerie time capsule, and I could almost hear the echoes of a distant past. I was scribbling notes when it began, the subtle yet inexorable advance of time within the carriage. Wrinkles crept upon Jenna's youthful face, Marcus's strong posture began to stoop, and Ellie's vibrant eyes dulled. We aged years in mere hours, a grotesque party to an unseen host. I delved into the carriage's history, uncovering the tendrils of a tale soaked in darkness. On the same date in the early 1900s, Carriage 13 had been part of a tragedy, a midnight collision on the tracks, a calamity that left a wound in the fabric of reality. The passengers, we learned, were part of a cult, dabbling in the occult, seeking eternal life. Their ritual had gone awry, leading to an explosion of energy that ensnared the carriage in a loop of its final journey. As the train rattled on, we felt more than just the passage of time. We were haunted by the specters of those cultists, their faces twisted in a rictus of eternal regret. Whispering voices filled the air, and shadows danced just beyond the periphery of vision. Ellie, her voice a tremulous thread, revealed that she had seen these apparitions before. Her interest in Carriage 13 wasn't casual, it was a quest to understand her own recurring nightmares. The deaths aboard Carriage 13 were said to be unexplained, victims of a curse that fed on souls seeking the thrill of the unknown. Marcus, with a resolve forged in battle, declared we'd break this cycle. We needed to reenact the ritual, reverse it, and avert the disaster that had condemned the carriage to its eternal journey. We scoured the carriage for artifacts, finding an ancient timepiece, its hands spinning backward, and a dusty tome with instructions we could barely comprehend. We recited words that felt like ice on our tongues, and as the night reached its zenith, a spectral scream pierced the air. The train shuddered to a stop, the lights flickered, and we were in darkness. A chilling sense of finality washed over us, and for a moment, I thought we'd failed. Then, as suddenly as it had all begun, dawn broke through the windows. We stumbled out of Carriage 13, the morning sun warming faces that were once again youthful. The carriage itself was gone, as if it had never been there at all, leaving behind only the empty tracks and the memories of the night's terrors. In the days that followed, I pieced together our story. Marcus, Jenna, Ellie, and I had been part of something beyond the scope of human understanding, a battle against the time-worn curse, a triumph over the spectral remnants of a devilish pact. Yet, sometimes, in the still of the night, I ponder the cost of our intervention. The history books no longer spoke of the tragedy, but there was a palpable emptiness in the space where Carriage 13 once stood. We had altered something fundamental, a thread pulled from the tapestry of time, and I wonder what frayed edges we left in our wake. The Midnight Express still runs, punctual and ordinary, but the tale of Carriage 13 has passed into the realm of Creepypasta, a chilling account shared in hushed excitement. Yet, for those of us who lived it, the memories linger, a haunting refrain of a night when time itself was our adversary, and the veil between worlds grew perilously thin. Story number 2. I was barely out of college, a cub reporter with a taste for the unexplainable, when the story of the midnight train came across my desk in the fall of 2002. It was a peculiar tale, one that might make the skin crawl and the hairs on the back of one's neck stand at attention. What I didn't know then was that I was about to become a part of the story, a thread woven into the tapestry of the paranormal events that unfolded in a suburban American town that autumn. The train was an ordinary commuter one, making its routine passage through the heart of the suburbs. I often rode it, sometimes glancing around at my fellow passengers: Lila, a nurse in her mid-20s, Ryan, a shaggy-haired guitarist, Sophie, a graphic designer with a penchant for the macabre, and there were others, their faces now mere blurs in my memory. But on that particular night, as the train slipped into a tunnel, an unanticipated darkness enveloped us. This was no ordinary darkness, it felt thick, heavy with whispers of the past. And then, the screams began. At first, I thought it was a prank, adolescent mischief on a dull commute home, but the terror in those screams was palpable, visceral. It was chaos, the sound of pure fear. People were shouting, and I heard what sounded like the rustling of hands brushing against fabric, the gasps of breath from mouths unseen. Lila was praying under her breath, her voice a stark contrast to the cacophony around us. Ryan was strumming his guitar earlier, but now his instrument lay abandoned, the strings echoing the chaos with a haunting dissonance. Sophie clutched her sketchpad to her chest, her eyes wide with horror as the darkness seemed to press against us. When the lights flickered back on, the carriage appeared unchanged, but for some, the experience had been all too physical. Lila's arm bore the mark of fingers that had gripped her tightly, an angry red against her pale skin. Ryan's face was etched with scratches, and Sophie's sketchpad was on the floor, pages torn out, as if by claws. The investigation that followed uncovered a history stained with tragedy. Decades earlier, a train had derailed in that very tunnel, the result of a ritual gone wrong, an attempt to summon something from beyond the veil by a group that dabbled in dark arts. The screams we heard were echoes of that disaster, the terror of passengers caught between worlds. I interviewed the surviving family members of the victims, the train officials, and local historians. Each account was laced with the chilling acceptance of the supernatural. The tunnel had become a threshold between the living and the dead, a space where the two could, for moments of terror, interact in the most harrowing of ways. There were exorcism deaths linked to the event, tales of those who had tried to cleanse the tunnel but were consumed by the very darkness they sought to banish. Unexplained deaths followed, of those who'd witnessed the ghostly hands and couldn't live with the memory, their minds shattered by fear. The incident on the train became a cautionary tale, the subject of whispered stories and an infamous creepypasta that spread like wildfire on the internet. But for those of us who were there, it wasn't just a story, it was a scar that marked our souls. I continued to ride the train, out of necessity more than desire. Each time we approached the tunnel, I held my breath, half expecting the lights to die and the screams to begin anew. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I would wake up, thinking I felt a hand that wasn't there, a brush against my skin like the memory of a nightmare. I left that town eventually, chasing new stories, new horrors, but the screams and the silence of Carriage 13 never left me. They linger in the quiet moments, a reminder that some pasts never die, and some darkness is never fully illuminated, no matter how bright the lights we shine upon them. Story number 3. Back in 2003, I was a fledgling investigative podcaster, a nobody aiming to be a somebody by unraveling the strange and the sinister. That ambition drew me to the story of a cursed carriage that even the most skeptical in our sleepy suburban town couldn't ignore. It was the tale of the last ticket collector. I can still recall the weight of my recorder in my pocket as I stepped onto the 10:10 p.m. train, the one that was rumored to harbor the phantom. The carriage seemed normal, filled with the mundane, tired workers, young couples, people lost in books and music. Among them were the subjects of my interest, a lawyer named Alex, haunted by a case gone wrong, Rachel, a painter whose canvases were filled with the shadows of her own mind, and Noah, a former athlete whose career had ended in a twisted wreck. I remember the creeping unease that settled over us as the train pulled away from the platform. It wasn't long before the ticket collector emerged from the front of the train, a figure from another era, his uniform pristine, but his eyes hollow. With a nod, he began his rounds, his antique punch clinking like a chorus of the damned. Alex presented his ticket with a quiver I could hear in his voice. The collector punched it, and the letters that appeared spelled guilt. Almost instantly, Alex's compartment twisted into a courtroom, the accusing eyes of a family he'd failed staring at him from the seats. Rachel trembled as her ticket was taken, the word rejection appearing upon it. Her compartment transformed into an art gallery of horrors, her darkest thoughts displayed for all to see, the eyes in her portraits following her every move. Noah was last, the word failure etched into his ticket. His space became an endless loop of the moment his body betrayed him, a never-ending replay of the accident that crushed his dreams. I watched in horror as the scenes unfolded, a bystander to the terror that was as personal as it was palpable. When the collector turned to me, a chill seared through my veins, but he merely tipped his cap and moved on. I was the chronicler, not the participant, yet fear had sunk its teeth into me all the same. The train's lights flickered as each passenger faced their nightmares, their cries a symphony of despair. I could do nothing but document the torture, my recorder a lifeline that anchored me to reality. It was when the train pulled into the last station that reality snapped back like a rubber band stretched too far. The compartments returned to normal, but the passengers, they were changed. Alex was weeping, his face the very image of sorrow. Rachel was curled up, her fingers stained with paint that had appeared from nowhere. Noah sat in stony silence, staring at the space where his nightmare had played out. I interviewed them afterward, their stories weaving a tapestry of terror that felt too real, too raw to be anything but true. Each of them had been touched by tragedy tied to the rail line, a derailment decades ago, a conductor who had taken his life after failing to prevent it. The last ticket collector, it seemed, was his specter, forever collecting the emotional debts of those who rode his train. The recordings I made that night became the first episode of a podcast that would grow infamous. The story spread, morphing into a creepypasta that chilled even the most hardened horror enthusiasts. As for the Carriage, it was quietly decommissioned, though some say the last ticket collector still rides the rails, waiting for new passengers to punch their tickets to terror. Even now, as I recount these events, I can't shake the feeling that I left something of myself on that train, a piece of my soul that the last ticket collector keeps as a souvenir. In every carriage I board, in every ticket I'm handed, I search for signs of the phantom and his antique punch. Perhaps it's only a matter of time before he comes to collect from me, the last passenger of the cursed carriage. Story number 4. I was driving back from an interview for a gig I didn't get when I first heard about the reenactment compartment. It was 2004, and I'd been chasing the ghost stories and urban legends that clung to the underbelly of the suburbs like persistent fog. This one, though, was a different breed of phantom, a carriage where the past was not remembered but relived. The midnight train had one such carriage, an anomaly among the modern fleet. I stepped inside on a dare, my handheld camera my only witness. It was just me, a history buff named Marcus, an aspiring actress named Clara, and a couple named Derek and Mia who love thrill rides more than the truth. The moment the doors slid shut, the transformation began. Our clothes morphed into the garb of a bygone era. The carriage, once sterile and plastic, warmed to wood and velvet. Marcus, who'd boarded in a t-shirt and jeans, now sported a three-piece suit and a bowler hat. Clara's sundress shifted into a corseted gown. Derek and Mia, once in matching thrill ride tees, were now a dapper gentleman and a flapper, respectively. We were not ourselves anymore, and the weight of unknown personas pressed upon our shoulders. As the train trundled along, it became clear we were reenacting the prelude to a disaster. Marcus, or rather the gentleman he'd become, spoke of financial ruin if the train did not make its timely delivery. Clara fretted over a secret that could scandalize her family. Derek and Mia, their characters steeped in the clandestine thrill of a forbidden romance, whispered of eloping. And I was the observer, the journalist documenting the journey, my camera now a heavy, antique thing hanging from my neck. As we slipped into our roles, the creeping realization that we were part of a historical calamity became palpable. I urged them to break character, to remember who they were, but the past's grip was a vice that turned tighter with every click of the rails. The tragedy, as I pieced it together from journals and records later, was a derailment. A sabotage orchestrated by a scorned lover, a worker on the line who had made a pact with the devil himself to ensure the train would never reach its destination if he could not have his heart's desire. The terror set in when Marcus, or his past self, began to speak of cutting corners, of rail lines left unchecked. Clara's secret was a connection to the worker, a love affair that ended in betrayal. Derek and Mia's elopement, the catalyst for the worker's fury. In a desperate attempt to prevent the past's grim echo, I turned my camera on them, using the viewfinder to break the illusion. The modern world flickered through the lens, and I shouted for them to see it, to remember. The train jolted. Screams. The screech of metal. We braced for an impact that never came. Instead, the train slowed, and the carriage returned to its mundane state, releasing us from the grip of history. We disembarked, shaken, our modern clothes back upon us, but the chill of the past still clinging to our skin. We had averted the calamity, but at what cost? Derek and Mia clung to each other, their thrill-seeking days behind them. Clara wept, the echoes of heartache old yet fresh. Marcus stared blankly, his mind grappling with the close shave with financial and moral ruin. The investigation that followed turned up the derailment from the archives, the devilish pact, and the names of the people we had become. Our testimonies, coupled with the historical evidence, formed a creepypasta that haunts forums to this day, a story of passengers trapped in a cycle of reenactment. I put away my camera after that. The footage I'd captured flickered with the shadows of the past, too harrowing to revisit. In every train's whistle, I hear the echoes of that night, the screams, the confessions, the ghostly dread of a disaster narrowly escaped. Now, I tell this tale as a warning. Beware the past that lurks in the steel veins of our country, for it may just ensnare you in its tragic replay. Story number 5. I was walking along the desolate platform of the suburban train station when I first stumbled upon the story of Carriage of the Faceless. The year was 2005. And whispers of the carriage's curse had already seeped into the cracks of local folklore. People spoke in hushed tones, trading stories of passengers who had boarded but never seemed to come back quite the same. My curiosity, an insatiable beast, lured me onto that train one fateful evening. I found myself in the company of 3 others, Sarah, a nurse with a kind but somber face, Ethan, a quick-witted college student, and Leah, a graphic designer whose bright eyes flickered with an artist's flame. As the train lurched forward, our reflections stared back at us from the windows. But with each passing mile, our reflections became blurrier, our features smudging like wet ink. Panic bloomed when Ethan reached for his face, only to find it smooth and featureless. A primal fear seized us, a fear of losing not just our faces but our very identities. We scoured the carriage for answers, discovering etchings on the underside of the worn leather seats. Names and dates, scratched in desperation by those who'd come before us, victims of the same fate, their existence all but forgotten. It was then we understood, the carriage was cursed to steal away the identities of those who rode within, leaving them as blank slates, just as the victims of a long-forgotten tragedy had been erased from memory. It happened to me first, the feeling of my mouth disappearing, my voice a mere vibration in my throat. Ethan, his wits still about him despite his smooth visage, discovered a pattern in the etchings. They all mentioned a date, the anniversary of a derailment that had claimed untold lives, lost to history, their stories untold. Leah, faceless now, her artist's eyes gone, began to sketch frantically with a pen she found in her bag. drawing the faces of us all from memory. It was our act of defiance, our refusal to be forgotten. Sarah, her nurturing instincts still intact, suggested we must remember each other, tell each other our stories to keep our identities alive. And so we did, recounting our lives, our joys and sorrows, our triumphs and defeats, imbuing the carriage with our essence, our humanity. I was recounting my first memory, a vivid image of my mother's smile, when the train passed through a tunnel. In that darkness, something shifted. The train emerged into the light, and our faces began to return, our features reforming with every word spoken, every memory shared. We disembarked at the next station, our faces ours once again, but forever etched with the experience. An investigation into the train's history uncovered a list of those who had died in the derailment, their stories nearly lost to time. Our testimonies, alongside the recovered history, became a creepypasta that circulated with a fervor, igniting discussions about identity, memory, and the importance of remembrance. The Carriage of the Faceless remains a harrowing tale told in the dark corners of the internet, a cautionary account of a cursed carriage that sought to strip away the very thing that makes us who we are. But we, the survivors, carry the truth in our restored features and the shared bond of our defiance against oblivion. I was driving home when I passed by the train station again, my heart skipping at the sight of the Midnight Express. I turned away, a silent vow never to forget, for in the end, it is our stories that keep us alive in the faces of those we share them with. Story number 6. I was driving through the foggy streets of the suburban town when the tale of the whistleblower's curse first came to my attention. It was the year 2006, a year marked by unexplained vanishings that had left the community whispering about the old rail line and its sorrowful past. The story began with 4 of us, youthful and brimming with invincible spirits, seeking a thrill on the infamous midnight train. There was Marcus, an ambitious journalist with a hunger for the truth, Jenna, a pragmatic engineering student, Tyler, whose life was music and who always carried his guitar, and myself, drawn to the unknown like a moth to a flame. Our laughter echoed in the carriage, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that enveloped us. Then, without warning, the whistle blew, a melancholic, haunting sound that seemed to weep for the souls of a long-ago disaster. With each shrill note, one of us disappeared. Marcus vanished first, his pen left spinning on the seat. Jenna was next, her blueprints fluttering to the floor like lost dreams. Then Tyler, his guitar string vibrating with a note that lingered long after he was gone. Panic settled heavy in my chest as the empty seats bore silent witness to the curse. I was walking through the carriage, searching desperately, when I stumbled upon an old, tattered cap, a conductor's cap. The whispers in the town had spoken of a conductor who, burdened by grief over the tragic derailment, was doomed to ride the rails for eternity. I felt it in my bones. I had to find him. As the whistle blew again, I braced myself, but instead of vanishing, I was transported to the scene of the tragedy. I stood amidst the screams and twisted metal, the air thick with the stench of smoke and fear. I saw the conductor, a phantom replaying the same moment of horror, unable to escape the torment of his failure to prevent the disaster. He was blowing the whistle, trying to warn of the impending doom that had already passed, a loop of eternal remorse. I approached him, my heart pounding, my voice barely above a whisper, "You can let go. It wasn't your fault." The apparition looked at me, his eyes wells of unspeakable pain. "I can't undo what has been done," he rasped. "But you can stop the cycle," I implored. "Bring them back. Let them live." A silence stretched between us, the kind that speaks louder than any scream. Then, he nodded, and with a final, fading blow of the whistle, the carriage was filled once again with my friends. We were back, but not the same. We had glimpsed a fragment of the past, felt the weight of lost souls. Our own fears and guilt seemed trivial in comparison. The train came to a stop, and we disembarked in silence. Our experience, once we found the courage to speak of it, became a cautionary creepypasta, circulated on forums and whispered in chat rooms. I was laying in bed when I heard it again, the faint sound of a whistle in the distance. It was a reminder that the past is never truly gone, and sometimes, to move forward, you must first make peace with the echoes of bygone tragedies. The story of the whistleblower's curse remains, a chilling tale of sorrow and redemption that resounds through the silent nights in the suburbs, a siren call to those who listen for the truth hidden in the darkness. Story number 7. I remember driving through the forgotten parts of a suburban sprawl, chasing rumors of the supernatural for a podcast that barely anyone knew existed. My name wasn't important then, it was the stories that consumed me. The year was 2007, and the story that caught my attention was of the dining car's Last Supper. There were 4 of us, youthful adventurers searching for a truth we weren't sure existed. Lily, a chef whose curiosity about historical recipes was as vast as her imagination. Ethan, a young doctor whose rational mind sought logical explanations. Ava, an amateur historian with a penchant for the grim details of the past. And myself, a hopeful paranormal investigator. We boarded the train on a dare, a playful jab at our collective courage. The dining car was a remnant of a bygone luxury, its tables set with crystal and silver that gleamed under the dim lights. As the first course was served, a rich soup that smelled of herbs in a time long past, I noticed the fine china had cracks running through it, like veins. With each spoonful, Lily began to cough, the taste turning to ash in her mouth. Ethan's brow furrowed in concern as he examined the food, unable to explain the phenomena. Ava's hand trembled as she recounted the tale of the Last Supper, where a dining party had been poisoned, their fates sealed by a meal meant for celebration. I was walking between the tables, my recorder in hand, when the air turned cold. With each course that followed, we experienced flashes of the original event, the laughter that turned to gasps, the clinking glasses that became desperate pleas for help. To break the cycle, we realized we had to refuse the cursed meal, to push away the plates and uncover the poisoned truth. We delved into the archives, uncovering the story of a jealous chef who, scorned by unrequited love, laced the final feast with a deadly toxin. The revelation came to Ava in a vision so vivid, it left us gasping for air in a carriage that no longer felt real. The last dish was a dessert, a chocolate mousse that looked innocuous but was the harbinger of death. We stood up, overturning the table in symbolic defiance. The spirits of the past, bound to the tragedy, began to fade away with our act of rejection, their unfinished stories clinging to the remnants of the feast like cobwebs. We made it out, our friendships strained by the ordeal but our resolve strengthened. We had tasted the bitterness of a history forgotten and spat it out defiantly. I was driving home when I realized the recorder was still running. It had captured everything, the coughs, the whispers of the past, and our voices intertwined with those of the long deceased. It was evidence of the otherworldly, a testimony of our encounter with the damned. The dining car's Last Supper became a tale whispered in the dark corners of the internet, a creepypasta that dared readers to believe in the horrors that lurk in the pages of history. Some nights, when the boundary between past and present thins, I can still taste the ashen soup on my tongue, a reminder of the night when the dead dined with the living. Story number 8. I was on the trail of something insidious, an auditory haunting that resonated with the chilling force of urban legend. It was late 2008, and I had heard murmurs of a carriage where past and present collided in a symphony of horror. Each compartment, they said, trapped a different note of a long-forgotten disaster, the derailment that had claimed countless lives. My name is Alex, and I was once a skeptic. But that was before the echoes of the derailed seeped into my bones. I gathered a group of fellow curiosity seekers, Zoe, a sound engineer intrigued by the acoustic anomaly, Marco, a paramedic who'd seen enough of death to want to understand its echoes, and Jess, whose interest in the macabre was only surpassed by her skill in electronic voice phenomena, EVP. We boarded at midnight, the witching hour when the veil is thin, and the past whispers to the present. The train's electric hum was our overture as we braced ourselves in the heart of the metal beast. In the first compartment, we heard laughter, raucous, bright, the sound of celebration. Zoe's equipment captured every giggle, every clink of glasses raised in a toast. But as we moved forward, laughter twisted into shrieks, the toasts into a thunderous, relentless grinding. "It's replaying the derailment," Jess whispered, her EVP recorder crackling with the voices of the unseen. The next car was a cocktail of chaos, the metallic scent of blood, the crumpling of steel, and the cries of the wounded. Here, the sounds clawed at us, pulling us into the abyss of the tragedy. Marco was stoic, but I saw his hands tremble, reaching for injuries he could not heal. With each compartment, a different scene of the tragedy unfolded, demanding we piece together the auditory clues. The puzzle was a mosaic of human experience, painted in fear and sorrow. Our journey's climax was the silence, a void that followed the cacophony. In that hush, we understood the full scope of the horror. It was in this silence that the lost souls seemed to gather, their stories etched into the very air we breathed. I was walking through the wreckage, my hand tracing the cold walls, when realization struck us. To silence the echoes, we had to acknowledge them, give voice to the silent screams, and offer the comfort that had been denied. We held a makeshift seance, our circle a beacon in the dark. We spoke of the tragedy with reverence, gave names to the nameless, and in doing so, we became a conduit for peace. I was driving home when the sun peeked over the horizon, a night of terror behind us. We had silenced the echoes, not by force, but by remembrance. The recordings were a testament to our encounter, each one a chapter of the derailment's tale. The story of echoes of the derailed became a siren's call to those who chased the shadows, a creepypasta whispered in hushed tones. To this day, I can close my eyes and hear the laughter that precedes the storm, a reminder of the night when the past reached out, and we answered. Story number 9. I was driving through the heart of an old suburb when the legend of the lost conductor came to me like a transmission from the ether. It was the year 2009, a time when the digital age had yet to fully silence the whispers of the analog world, and I was a documentarian, hunting the thin places where reality gave way to something more spectral. Her name was Lily, and she called me in a voice tinged with static, her words a mixture of fear and intrigue. She was a college student, a history major with a penchant for the hidden narratives of American railroads. Alongside her was her boyfriend, Mike, a psychology student, and her best friend, Sarah, an aspiring actress who found the drama of the supernatural irresistible. Together, they stumbled upon a tale that clawed at the edges of their rational minds. The last carriage of the commuter train that passed through their town held a door that wasn't supposed to exist. I was walking alongside them as they showed me their discovery, a door, aged and weather-beaten, that seemed to waver between our world and another. It was a threshold that begged to be crossed, and against my better judgment, we obliged. The interior was not the familiar plastic and metal of modern transportation, but a tableau of antiquated opulence. Velvet seats worn by time, brass fittings tarnished by grief. It was here that we met him, the lost conductor, a man out of time whose sorrow was so profound it anchored him to this spectral carriage. His name was Edward, and he was a conductor when steam was the lifeblood of locomotion. In his eyes, the flames of the accident that had taken his passengers, and his peace, still burned. He couldn't move on, reliving the tragedy with each ghostly whistle. It happened to me, the chilling realization that we were not just observers but participants in his purgatory. We had to navigate his memories, twisted corridors of remorse and loss, to convince him to find peace. Sarah became the voice of compassion, her acting skills morphing into genuine empathy as she spoke to Edward. Mike provided insight into the psychological anchors that held the conductor in place. Lily poured through historical records, seeking the truth of the accident to arm us with facts. As I documented our interactions, our reality began to slip. We experienced fragments of the past, screams, the rending of metal, the desperate clamor for life in the face of impending death. To free Edward, we had to reconstruct the narrative of that fateful night, give testimony to the lives lost, and validate the conductor's guilt. We held a vigil in the train, a requiem for those forgotten souls, and invited Edward to join the ranks of memory, not a prisoner of it. I was standing with them when a spectral light enveloped Edward, his features softening, his grief lifting like mist at dawn. The door that was not a door began to fade, and we found ourselves back in the last carriage of a very normal train, the modern world greeting us with the jolt of reality. The investigation we undertook became a documentary, The Lament of the Lost Conductor, which held its viewers in a grip tight as the past holds the dead. We had touched the intangible, conversed with the echoes of loss, and in doing so, had given rest to a soul in turmoil. And yet, the creepypasta born from our experience endures, circulating online as a digital legend. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself listening for the distant whistle of a train, wondering if Edward truly found peace or if, perhaps, some stories are destined to repeat forever.